we're going to kick off the morning with Governor Tate Reeves. Very excited to have Governor Reeves with us. And Governor, I'm going to just have to ask right off the bat. I understand there's some news that might be happening right now.
There is some news that we're going to announce. Somebody's going to announce it later today, but I'm going to announce it now. Because, I don't have to run again, so I can do that, right? No, look, it's an exciting time to be in Mississippi. We've had unprecedented economic development in our state. 2024 was the best year ever in terms of new capital investment in our state. And the great thing about 2024 is if you took the $10 billion capital commitment by AWS, just took it off the table and pretend like it didn't happen, we still announced more projects with more capital investment in 2024 than at any time in our state's history. So without AWS, 2024 would have been the best year ever in Mississippi history. And so our team, Bill Cork at MDA, and really all of our local economic developers around the state are really just working their tail off, and we're seeing the success. And so today we are going to announce a project that is similarly sized to AWS. It's a $10 billion capital investment in Lauderdale County, Mississippi. All of the major data center projects include very large companies, some of the 4 or 5 or 6 largest companies in the world, and they all have a different business model, and that's one of the things that we have been able to learn about over the last couple of 3 years. And this particular company is a company out of Dallas called Compass Data Centers. They're committing to $10 billion, thousands and thousands of jobs, huge amounts of local fee in lieu tax going to the locals, and literally going to be just yet another record-breaking year in 2025, started off by this huge announcement, which is now tied for the largest economic development announcement in Mississippi history. So,
congratulations to you, your team, to our local folks, to all of those that were involved. I know that with MEC we have a lot of our folks that are involved in economic development, whether it's our utilities and others. But to see this happen is really important. You mentioned that because you and I sat here last year and talked about that in the first 4 years of your term, you had about $6 billion of investment, about 5,000 jobs created, and we thought, man, that's some really good stuff. And then within 2 weeks, the AWS announcement comes, all that, and now today, this major announcement with the Compass. Why is it so important that we continue to build on this foundation that has been put in place for our economic development growth?
Well, obviously, we want to see our economy growing. And, one of the great statistics that occurred in 2024, not only because of the existing businesses that we have here that are doing phenomenally well, the existing businesses that we have growing, combine that with the new companies that are coming to Mississippi, the Amplify project that we announced last year, which was almost $2 billion in CapEx up in Marshall County, which is ahead of schedule and booming up there. I know we may have some people here in the room that are very familiar with that. But hey there they are. Thank you all for being here. I know Scott really appreciates you being here at MEC Capital Day. Look, the fact is we want to grow our economy. And in the third quarter of 2024, which is the most recent data that we have, Mississippi's GDP grew by 5.1%. That was the third fastest GDP growth in America. So for those of you that have been in Mississippi for a long time, did you ever think we could grow our economy faster than 47 other states around the country? And so that's why these investments are so important to our state. That's the reason that the success of our local businesses are so important. And the reality is you just can't spend $20 or $25 billion in a state whose total GDP is $120 billion without making a difference, without moving the needle. And that's what's happening in our state, and every business that is here benefits from that. Now, it also creates some challenges, obviously, when you have that many jobs, when your unemployment rate is as low as ours is. I tell the story for my entire life, and I've been involved in economics and finance at some level, at least since the early to mid-90s. My entire life, Mississippi's unemployment rate was always the national average plus 1.5% to 2%. Always. Until about 4 years ago. And now, in 2024, month after month after month, we saw unemployment rates at the lowest levels in the history of our state. We saw unemployment rates that were somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5% below the national average. Right now, the national unemployment rate is about 4.3%. Mississippi's is about 2.9%. Now, that creates challenges as well. We've talked a lot about this, is how do we continue this, and it certainly puts pressure on wages, but also what it's going to do in the future. If we're going to continue to see 4 to 5% GDP growth in our state, we're not going to be able to just do that organically. We've got to see more population shifts into our state. We need to see more workers moving into our state. Part of that, improving our image as a state, is going to help with that. But if we're going to continue to see those kind of numbers, that kind of GDP growth, it's going to take a combination of intrinsic growth plus population growth.
And you just touched on something really that I wanted to ask you about, is that these major announcements that we've had, they've been a mix of things, but it's really opened the door for us, particularly from technology perspective. How is that helping change how others view Mississippi?
Well, there's no doubt that when some of the largest companies in the world, Fortune 5, Fortune 100, Fortune 150 companies, choose Mississippi, it sends a ripple effect, because when you're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal above the fold, a lot of people see that. And a lot of people, both in government as well as in the C-suites of major companies, are trying to figure out now, why is everyone choosing Mississippi? Why is Mississippi winning project after project after project? And we kind of want to keep that secret sauce quiet. I mentioned population growth a little bit earlier. I like to joke with some of my political friends that in a lot of ways, Mississippi is the best kept secret in the world, and a large majority of my supporters want to keep it that way. But I don't. I want to see our economy growing, and I think that we have ample opportunity for that. And so not only are we seeing companies in all spaces take a second look at Mississippi, clearly the capital investments being made by large technology companies and the types of jobs they are bringing. So we're not just having successes in terms of the size and the scope of these capital investment announcements. It's different kinds of jobs, and it's jobs that require a different level of skills. And the reason that's so important is because these jobs that we're announcing, by and large, they ain't $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year jobs. These are much higher paying jobs. It's the reason our per capita incomes are up 35 to 40% in the last 4 years in Mississippi. We've moved more in terms of absolute dollar numbers in the last 5 years in per capita income, I think, than we moved in the previous 30 years. And it's because they're requiring different skills. Now, that also makes it imperative that we are successful in training and retraining our workforce for those jobs of the future. I see Courtney Taylor here, who runs Accelerate Mississippi. I couldn't be more happy with the progress that Mississippi has made in workforce development and workforce training. Site Consultant magazine just came out with their end of the year report in the last week or so, and Mississippi, when we redid our workforce training in 2020 and 2021, we really wanted to get more like what Louisiana was doing and more like what Alabama was doing, because they had been successful. Well, in the most recent report, Mississippi's ranked 3rd in the Southeast for workforce development by site consultants around America, ahead of both Louisiana and Alabama. And so I think it's clearly a statement as to what Scott has done, what the private sector leaders of the State Workforce Investment Board have done, and then what the staff has done at Accelerate Mississippi. And look, the big winners in all of this are all of you that run businesses, because our workforce is more capable and more competent and more qualified today than we've ever been. We've got more work to do, we recognize that, but wow, we've come a long way in a short period of time.
Well, you know, and that's what, one of the things I wanted to ask you is to your point, I appreciate the opportunity to serve on the State Workforce Investment Board, work with Courtney and her team, but how can we as the private sector continue to help grow that for you and make that something that is really important to continue to focus on workforce?
Well, I think more than anything else, the role, I mean, obviously, when we reconstituted the State Workforce Investment Board, it was really important to me that we had private sector leadership on that board. Really, really important, because I'm of the opinion that oftentimes government doesn't do a whole lot well, and we certainly aren't going to be phenomenal. Government's never going to be phenomenal in a political environment of training the types of people that, for us to determine the types of people that you need. So the major role that you play is constant communication, helping us understand, helping the State Workforce Investment Board, helping Courtney and her team understand the types of employees and the types of skills that they need. Now, what we're going to always say is, okay, help us understand what are the high demand fields in your particular industry, and what kind of skills do those individuals need, and oh, by the way, how much do they make? Because we don't want our incentives going to creating jobs that are below our average wage in either a county or the state, and we don't want our workforce training dollars to be spent on the lower skill, lower wage employees, because we know we have scarce resources. And so if there are openings and there is a need for welders and other areas such as that have higher wages, that's where we want to focus. We're not just going to do that, but that's where we're going to focus.
Well, and we're excited about that, the relationship that we have with Accelerate, the conversations we've had, particularly as it relates to a project within our Work Future project that we're beginning to stand up, is designed to help make that connection between the private and the public sector as we go forward. We got just a couple more minutes, so I want to shift to taxes for just a second. I know that's something that even when you were Lieutenant Governor, we spent a lot of time working on issues. It's still very important for us to have a competitive tax environment. Why is this something, it is always something you continue to look at?
Well, look, let's start with where we are financially as a state. We're in the best financial shape Mississippi's ever been in. We're in the best fiscal shape Mississippi has ever been in. My last year as Lieutenant Governor of the state of Mississippi spent $5.8 billion on the general fund budget. Last year, the legislature spent $7 billion on the general fund budget. When I was first elected state treasurer, that year, it was $3.2 billion budget in the state of Mississippi. So it has grown considerably, even though we have cut taxes twice in the last 7 years. The largest tax cut ever in the history of the state in 2016, followed by a slightly larger one just 2 years ago. And so, look, there are always going to be those who want to spend more, and what we have, I think, proven is a willingness that when it makes sense to do that. But also understand that even though the budget has grown in the last 4.5 years from $5.8 billion to $7 billion, we collected over $7.8 billion last year. So we had an $800 million surplus just in fiscal year 2024. So we believe that in the long term, the best way in which and the most fair way in which to tax individuals is on a consumption basis, not on an income basis. We believe that we need more people in the workforce. We need more people working. And the best way for you to get more of something is to tax it less. And so that's why so many years ago, we have worked very diligently over time to try to reduce and hopefully ultimately eliminate the income tax in our state. And that's something that I am committed to. I think we can do it. I think we can do it quick. and I think we can do it in a responsible way. Now, some of you are probably thinking that, the income tax doesn't really matter. And maybe you're right. But I will tell you this. 2 years ago, we cut the income tax in Mississippi from 5% to 4%. By the way, we also have the highest exemption in America. So everyone that wants to talk about all the taxes that the lower income people are paying, just understand in Mississippi, if you make $36,600 a year and you're married, you don't pay a penny of income tax in Mississippi. Our income tax schedule does not begin until $36,600 for a married couple, and that's with no dependents, by the way. So just a married couple doesn't pay a tax up to $36,600 of their income. But we cut ours to 4% for everything above that back a couple years ago. Last year, Arkansas got in 2022, Arkansas got a new governor. Their governor came in, and last year during their legislative session, they cut their income tax to 3.9%, which I'm sure was just a random number that they picked out of the air. Fast forward about 4 or 5 months, in 2023, Louisiana got a new governor. They came in, and in the late summer, early fall, they cut their top bracket on their income tax to 3.5%, which again, I'm sure was a random number, had nothing to do with the fact that Arkansas was at 3.9 and Mississippi was at 4.0. And so there is a world that we live in which while we have been more successful than most in terms of economic development, and I would say we in the Southeast region, with the exception of Texas and South Carolina and Georgia, which we have competed with on a lot of projects, we've been more successful than all. But the reality is it is a competitive marketplace. And we're not only competing for new capital investment, we're also competing for new human capital and additional human capital, and bringing those individuals into our state to be able to do what we're trying to do. We have to understand that we have borders, and everybody that lives in Mississippi that is south of the Tennessee border has an income tax. And if you live north of the border, you don't. And that's just a fact. And so we know we have Texas to our west, Florida to our east, and Tennessee to our north. And I believe we have to be competitive with them. And I think we can do it in such a way where we structure our tax code, make a better tax code wherein we tax consumption and we don't tax income.
And that's all about creating that environment that helps grow our state. But I will tell you, the progress being made in economic development, the progress being made in education and workforce, those are really helping. But I think last week you got to have a little fun, and I wanted to ask you about that real quick. Is your wave down pat now? I guess from you actually got to ride on a float in the Rose Bowl parade that represented our state. Talk a little bit about why those things do things to help move our state forward.
Well, I can just tell you with certainty that I ain't ever going to be a pageant queen. I'm never going to get that wave down pat. But Ely and my 3 girls and I did have a blast. For the first time ever, Mississippi had a float in the Rose Parade. And it was, I would argue, exceptionally well received. It was obviously spearheaded by Rochelle Hicks, who is here. I see her in the back of the room. Who runs Visit Mississippi. 2024, not only was it the best year ever in Mississippi in terms of economic development, it was the best year we've ever had in terms of tourism as well. Some 43 million visitors entered our state in 2024. But we think we've got to take it to the next level. We've got to continue to see more and more visitors coming to our state. Tourism is always going to be an incredibly important piece of our economy. Not every state has a beach on the Gulf of America, but Mississippi does, and we need to tell our story to the world. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is there is no doubt that if we allow our competitors to tell Mississippi's story to the world, it ain't going to come out nearly as good as the truth. And I believe that whether it's economic development or tourism, the biggest challenge we have as a state is convincing someone to come here once. If they ever come here once, they tend to really like what they see. And so, you know, as we got on the float at 7:30 a.m., we actually had to get there at 6 a.m. because the traffic is awful. So we got there at 6 a.m.-ish, and with 3 teenage daughters, 6 a.m. is a relative term, right? So we got there around 6 a.m. We got on the float at 7:30, didn't get off until 10:50. And so 3 hours and 20 minutes of waving on the float, and I thought about complaining as I stepped off about the time commitment. And then I remembered that just in front of me was a group of individuals on horses, and just ahead of them was the sonic boom. And they had just marched 5.5 miles in a little over 3 hours. And so I really had no room to complain, but it was an incredible experience. 850,000 people attend the Rose Bowl parade in person, and over 30 million people across the globe saw Mississippi's float when we came across TV Row. And look, what better story to tell in Mississippi than a story that everybody understands, and that is Mississippi is the birthplace of America's music. If you didn't see the float, I encourage you to go look at it. We had an Elvis Presley right in front of the float. We had a B.B. King in the back of the float. We won, this is our first year ever, we won the Past President's Award as the best float in the entire parade, which again doesn't surprise me if you give folks from Mississippi an opportunity to be creative and actually win. What do? We go win. We had a lot of great partners out there. Visit Jackson was there, Visit Tupelo was there, a lot of others were there, and so it was I would just say it was an incredible experience, and I think it was a great day for Mississippi, and it really completed what was 2024, which will go down in history as certainly to date the best economic development tourism year in the history of Mississippi, and with today's announcement, I'm hopeful we can make 2025 even better.
Well, listen, congratulations to you, your team. The work you're doing is making a difference, and we appreciate it. We appreciate you taking a few minutes to come by and visit with us, and it always means a lot. Anything you want to mention before we wrap up?
No, look, the only thing I would just say is thank you for what y'all are doing. I mean, I can look across, and I'm not going to start naming names, but I can see individuals in this room today that we have either worked with over the last couple of years or are working with that are expanding your operations. The reality is it's easier for us to convince someone who is here to expand their operations because they already know the quality of our people. They already know the quality of our workforce, particularly in the manufacturing space. You know, thank you for what you're doing. All of the team members here from MDA and Accelerate Mississippi and state government, I want to thank them because they are, I'm telling you, you don't do a $10 billion announcement on January the 9th unless a whole lot of people worked over Christmas, okay? There's a lot of people that are working their tail off that are making a difference in our state. We've got more large announcements that are coming. What makes me extremely excited is while I'm from Central Mississippi, I love it when we make announcements in Central Mississippi and in DeSoto County and on the coast, but we have a lot of announcements and have had a lot of announcements in more rural areas of our state. I actually, without actually pulling up the list of announcements that we've made, off of memory, I went and started color coding a map of Mississippi, and in our 82 counties, in the last 4 years, we've announced projects larger than $75 million in 23 counties across the state. What we're seeing is truly transformational because a lot of those $150 to $200 million announcements are singles or doubles or triples for the state. But I'm telling you, they are grand slams for places like Quitman or Corinth and those places where we're seeing these large investments in major projects. The only thing I want to end with, because it's important, I need to say it, and that is site development grants. We've worked on workforce development, we worked on K-12 education, we're now working on site development because what we're thinking about while we're negotiating to get the local governments and local economic development entities to have a site prepared to be acquired and come off of our rolls, we also have to simultaneously be thinking about what is the next site where the next company may expand or locate. And so with members of the House and Senate who have been generous with us, working with us, we made an announcement about a month ago of somewhere in the neighborhood of $110 million that we're investing in site development. So go back to your local communities and figure out what sites you have. We're not going to have one of our top 30 sites in every county. We have top 30 sites in the state that we're investing in, but we're having 5 or 6 roll off every year, and we're putting new ones on. And so what we do want is we do want one of those top 30 sites to be within range of whatever county you live in, where you can at least touch it or drive to it, so that if you choose to live in a particular county, that you can go and work in whatever county you want to live in Mississippi. And so site development is critically important, and we are so much further ahead of so many of our peers in that area because we've invested almost $150 million in the last 4 years on site development. And one final statement, and because I'm very competitive, and I will tell you that in mid-November, Sarah Sanders in Arkansas stood with her legislature, and she had already passed a education reform bill that in many ways mirrored what we did 10 years ago. But she also just passed a site development grant program that mirrors what we did 4 or 5 years ago, and they announced $10 million in site development grants. And I texted a lot of my friends, both in the world that we live in here as well as in other states, and there's no doubt that we are doing things and other people are taking notice, and in many ways they're copying what we're doing, and that's a credit to all of us who have laid this foundation. So thank you all.
That's a fun thing. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it and look forward to continuing to work with you as we go forward.